It's now my duty to introduce the first panel discussion for today. The topic of this panel is why media inclusion needs to be addressed. Journalism students, just a note for you, just make sure you're up front and close and listening and engaged. These panels that you'll see today, again to our students, are your opportunity to engage with people from the disabilities community. By all means, listen in to this first panel to get some background information and an understanding of the way the day will operate. But panels subsequent to this, we do want you to and expect you to engage as much as possible. Please listen and think and have some questions ready for your panellists, journalism students. Thank you. I'll also, just a housekeeping matter, after this panel is over, we will have lunch. Again, journalism students, you must return after lunch to complete your compulsory induction for Project Open Doors. So we look forward to seeing everyone back. Okay, our panel today, this first panel will be facilitated by the Australian Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Alistair McEwen. Thank you very much. Our speakers today on this panel are Mr. Brett Casey, Chief Executive Officer for Deaf Services Queensland. We could just wave. Mr. Kevin Cox, AM, Australian Disability Discrimination Commissioner. Dr. Emma Phillips, Systems Advocate for Queensland Advocacy Incorporated. Ms. Katie Temple, Self-Advocate, thank you, Katie. And Mr. Nigel Webb, the chairperson of Queenslanders with a Disability Network. So I'll now hand over to the Commissioner to moderate this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Time is short, so we're going to dive straight in. I'm very excited to be the facilitator for this illustrious panel. The topic we're going to discuss is why media inclusion needs to be addressed. I might just start with this idea of inclusion and what it means, because there's so many interpretations and perspectives on inclusion. That's something I might like to start by asking our panel. What does being inclusive or inclusion actually mean, and how can we improve our understanding of true and authentic inclusion? I might start with Brett.
Why, thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so what I'm going to do before we start, because I think this morning we heard from the Commissioner and others talking about stereotypes in regards to the media and the portrayal of people with a disability in the media. So from my stereotype, I want to give you a challenge right now, and I'm going to provide you with a stereotype, because here I am, a deaf guy with a female voice. How many other deaf guys do you know with a female voice? Very few. Well, Kevin does. But for all of you who are on radio, on the phone, you could consider me a transgender deaf guy, given my voice. And so the challenge is there, because people, what they perceive or think is normal. For example, if you're talking about a grandmother, when you think of a grandmother, what does that mean to you? If we look on the internet, the portrayal for grandmother, we're probably getting images of an elderly woman with her hair up in a bun, possibly with a walking stick, with her grandchildren in her hands. So that's what we think, and that's the denotation in society. That's what we perceive to be a grandmother, as opposed to the connotation, and that's my view. My grandmother was very spunky when she was alive back in the past. She was great, she did things, she took us to the park. So my perception of a grandmother is very different to maybe what society portrays a grandmother to be. So if we're talking about media and inclusion, it needs to be portrayed differently as well. And I'll give you another example. I think there's been some studies in the past with the media in regards to the Winter Olympics in 2002. So once the Winter Olympics was done, the Winter Paralympics were there. So the same media team were there, but the footage was a lot less. There was a lot of reporting in the Olympics about any controversy that was happening, When it came to the Paralympics, a lot of controversy was happening, but there was only 2 or 3 reports of that. So it was lessened, and that was the perception of a disability and what they can't do, or how they're different and how that may be shameful and why that should be hidden. So now, from then on, from that study within journalism, I suggest you guys look at that article anyhow, just to give you some innovative ideas. But when we're looking at media and inclusion, it is really important to drop labels. So I work at Deaf Services Queensland, and we have a very simple vision there. It's about deaf people empowered, connected and achieving. And I noticed you've copied some of my vision up on your website here, empowered and connected to make change. So our vision is simple. It's about deaf people being empowered, connected and achieving. It's not about assistance. It's not about helping. It's not about trying to lead deaf people. It's about empowering them. So they can utilise our organisation as a resource, so deaf community members can come in and utilise us for their own purposes. It may lead them to be more empowered and connected and achieving in what they needed to do in life. So they utilise us as a resource. So it's about changing the perception of what a deaf person should be in regards to what the media may portray it to be. And I've done some online research on deafness and what it means. And the terms that come up in your Google search is can't hear, hearing impaired. It's all this negative connotation in everything. It's a very negative viewpoint and it's not valuing the deaf person. And when I say deaf, I am saying deaf. I'm a deaf person first. I'm not a person who is deaf. That is my identity. And if you had a deaf person's view on the internet about the deaf community, it's vibrant, it's alive, and it's full of social structure, sporting structure, religious structure. It's a vibrant community, so we have a very different perception. And you need to challenge yourselves as to how you perceive a person with a disability. And how can you change the current stereotypes and stigmas out there? And I don't have all the answers, but hopefully some of the information you'll hear today will help challenge your thought process. Is that okay, Al?
Thank you very much, Brett, for those excellent points you made about challenging the various labels and stereotypes that exist. And I guess I would like to add that you have a very lovely voice. It sounds beautiful.
I'm glad you can hear it, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Just to let you know, Brett and I go back a long way. So thank you, Brett. I might go to the end of the panel and I might ask Nigel to respond. Do you have any comments there?
I've got lots of comments, but not enough time. I'm sorry, I've got lots of comments, but not enough time. I'm aware of that. Look, the comments I'd like to make around the media is the media tends to sensationalise a fact or a bias about an issue. For example, a man is suffering from cerebral palsy, but he wins a gold medal. I may live with pain, but I'm not suffering, for those who are playing along. Media can investigate policy change and explain to the public the benefits and or the limitations for vulnerable persons, and it's important to seek out. It's important for the media to seek out alternative perspectives. Media must dispel the myth of other being seen as pity or charity. I am a contributor. And the media must embrace success stories with the same vigour as that will sell tragedies, as this lifts people out of the shadows and demonstrates the power of possibility and positivity for everyone.
Thank you so much, Nigel. I thought you'd have a lot more comments, but you were so succinct and to the point. Thank you so much. That was great. There was a specific point too about this whole idea of sensationalising, and that's a really great point you made. Thank you for that. I might now head to my left, and we might ask Katie to respond now.
The importance of inclusion and being included is that we all feel equal. We're all no different than anyone else without a disability. There are people with disabilities that can read and write, and they're out there. Some are actors or models. And yeah, we suffer with a lot of different limitations of our lives. There are people that can't walk, can't hear, can't see. And then there are people that can see. And then we think about, we're lucky. And by having a disability doesn't make us any different. We're just human beings.
Thank you, Katie, for your excellent points, especially reminding us that we do have a state of equality. And now I might go to the very end of the table to Kevin. Would you mind making comment now?
Thank you. Thanks, Al. First, I think in the media, I want to start with a point. Our stories define us. And for people with disabilities, we do not get to tell our stories. It is someone else who has a vested interest to tell a story, to promote their vested interests. And the media is a facilitator of that telling of the other, or othering people with disabilities as something that is, we've heard, I think, eloquently put it in his 4 points, but about, and Wolfensberger often said, people with disabilities are portrayed as mad, bad, and sad. And you could all get the trifecta one day. That is the obligation and the responsibility for media to change this stereotype. So the media is a very old institution. And one of the greatest barriers we have to break down is the institutional discrimination about people with disabilities. And the media is part of that institution. And institutions can be large, but they're made up of individuals. And as young journalist students here, you can begin tearing down the Berlin Wall of the media institution. I forgot to bring my little piece of cement that was part of the Berlin Wall that symbolised the greatest barrier between the North and the West, between capitalism and communism, between the othering of each other. So you as a media students of the future, as a journalist of the future, have an obligation and a responsibility to tear down the wall of apartheid. The apartheid that people with disabilities are homogenous and are other. You have to promote impairment as part of the human condition. From the time we are born to the time we die, we will all need some support. No one is an island. We are interdependent. This dichotomy that is portrayed about disability as dependent or independent is a false bastardry of the reality of life where everyone is interdependent. If anyone was independent, they'd be a hermit on Green Island. You have, and with regard to inclusion, I'll draw upon a quote by George Day. Inclusion is not welcoming people into what already exists. It is about creating new spaces so that it's welcoming of new opportunities and new experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for such wonderful points you've made, and that important topic about the other and othering. Thank you very much for that. Now, our last, definitely not the least, Emma.
Thank you very much, Alistair. I'd just like to make a couple of points, and I'll just start by speaking about inclusivity because through our work at Queensland Advocacy, which is a community legal centre and also a systems advocacy organisation, inclusivity is a theme that really underpins the work we do across a whole range of different areas in housing, in employment, in vulnerability and abuse. And so, and the way we see inclusivity is really about supporting people to have an ordinary life within the community, and that's going to look different for everyone. And so I think that's a really important point to keep in mind when we consider how why media inclusion needs to be addressed, because the media is in a position of immense power in shaping public opinion and in enforcing, reinforcing or changing stereotypes about people with disability. And often that can be based upon very specific examples that might be chosen or a very specific way of reporting about something. And we've had some concerns, as has been mentioned earlier, particularly with the rollout of the NDIS about some of the media reporting around that and the way in which that can be influencing community attitudes. There was an article that prompted us to write, actually, just last month to the Australian Press Council. It was an article that was run in the Daily Telegraph, but it was picked up by a number of different media outlets, and it was titled National Disability Insurance Scheme Funding Going to Animal Whisperers, Soul Counsellors and Spiritual Coaches. And some of you may have seen that article. Similarly, we've also put out media releases on articles such as with the headline, "Teen with 15-page rap sheet allegedly set fire to $100,000 worth of Kmart stock," which was about a young teenager with an intellectual disability and some mental health issues. And these are a couple of not great examples of, but important examples of the way in which the media can use its power to create and enforce negative stereotypes. And we think there's really a need for some stronger guidance and regulation of the media, particularly insofar as reporting of people with disability, because they have traditionally been and historically been subjected to some adverse stereotypes, as we've discussed today. And in fact, we have made a call, which has been quite widely supported, for the development of a specific standard, which there are already a couple of specific standards which supplement the general principles that the Press Council has developed to help to guide the media in their reporting of particular issues. And we've made a call just last month for the development of a specific standard or standards that should help to regulate the reporting of matters pertaining to disability and mental illness. And so we're really excited by this project, and we think it's a really important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for summarising those points. And I'd like to pick up on one of those comments you made, and that relates to the reporting of NDIS issues. And I've seen some very concerning headlines. For instance, the NDIS is failing, or there's a cost blowout, sensationalised words and titles. And I guess I'd like to ask everyone else on the panel if anyone would like to comment on this idea, or if you have other examples where you've seen adverse reporting, the type of reporting. Is there any comments that you'd like to make, or any adverse examples that you'd like to share of reporting you've seen recently? Anybody?
Yes, the media is all, and politicians included in the media, are always talking about the cost. But we must remember, when the Productivity Commission did the initial analysis, it said that by the year 2050, the return on the $20 billion would be $50 billion, which would be an increase, an added monetary economic gain to Australia, 3% of our GDP. And that return is because of better use of money, empowering people to participate in the workforce, and also then empowering families who once were denied the opportunity to earn money to be participating in the workforce. And so no one ever talks about the economic gain and contribution over time. But it's not all about economics, it's about the social gain and the capital building of individuals and communities.
May I respond, Al?
Yes, we might just go to Nigel first, and then Brett can follow up if that's possible.
There are some other points I was going to make, and this is a nice segue what Kevin's started a conversation on. And I talked about, well, what are people getting into? Because the last 40 years, people with disabilities have been coming out of institutions, out into the community, and more importantly, out of the shadows of difference. But I'd like to just point out a couple of quick things. What are people getting into with the advent of the NDIS and other instruments? Mainstream education at each level, a home setting that supports their independence, sport and recreation activities that stimulate and ensure enjoyment for people, holidays to different places, spaces that stretch the imagination, and employment opportunities that can empower and improve the people, their economic participation. So that's what's really happening, and that's what's driving that economic benefit that occurs for people with disabilities. And these are the things that I think we need to focus on as people with disabilities engaging in the community, because that's what's going to allow mine and many others social and economic participation. And that's what makes me and many others a valued citizen in the community that we call Australia.
Thank you very much. I might hand over to Brett now, and then I think Katie would like to make a comment too.
Okay, we're going male to female again. Great, awesome. Just to add on to what Kevin was talking about and the benefits of the NDIS and the economic and social benefit for the wider Australian community and enhancing the capacity of the lives of people with a disability. But the highlights that we're seeing in the media and the public domain are the negative ones. So people are now associating the NDIS with disabilities. And then they're hearing the word disability and it's becoming a negative connotation again. So it's being reiterated in different ways. And let's say an interpreter comes with you. The interpreter becomes just as important as my appearance. If I've got an interpreter in shorts and a singlet and thongs and I'm here to speak at this type of event, you would have that perception on me and you would see everything quite differently. So that's what I'm saying. We need to challenge thoughts and how we can think differently or talk differently about people with a disability. And report on real stories rather than on negative connotations and things that other people may perceive.
Thank you very much, Brett. That was excellent. And now over to Katie.
That was a very good speech before. I agree. There's a lot of negative comments about the prices of the NDIS, of how much the cost for people, I myself, with a mild intellectual impairment. I think it's great that people like myself and people around us that can get the normal lives that we deserve. And I think it's fantastic. We all should be heard and we all have a voice. And there's a lot of negativity out there. We're no different. Thank you.
I'm just conscious of the time, so I think we'll need to wrap up the panel discussion, but I'd like to give anyone or the panel an opportunity to have some final concluding comments, if you wish, perhaps starting with Nigel, and we'll progress down the table.
It's always dangerous to go first when you're told you're going last. But I just wanted to quickly point out some other things. What are some of the catalysts for the transition that we're experiencing? Changes in the healthcare practices for people with disability, changes in legislation and government policy at each level, improved access to places, spaces and information for each stakeholder. How important is information and how many of us can access it? many individual and collective success stories that happen in and often because of the community saying it needs to be done and celebrated. And lastly, a significant attitudinal adjustment within community that says if you're willing to get involved with each or some of the above, you're a welcome and supported member of community where where any difference is embraced. I think these are important things to ponder and consider in your journalism careers.
Thank you. I'd just like to add on to the conversation about the NDIS that we've just been having. I think, as Leslie said earlier, this is a huge development. It's a really pivotal moment in Australian history, and I think the press is a very important player in the conversation in terms of how the NDIS is being and will continue to be received, and it can be portrayed in very, very different lights, as an opportunity or as a burden on taxpayers, and we see all a huge range of different ways that it can be presented through the media. And so to the emerging journalism students, I think this is really a really important issue to be embracing for the opportunities it gives individuals and society and our economy, as opposed to the potential fears of cost blowouts and who's going to fund the NDIS and those type of issues. Thank you.
For the advice for the journalists is just be patient on how you come across with people with disabilities. And if we're not sure what you mean, we'll just ask. We're not that shy. And what else? And I thank you personally for the journalists that are studying. You're giving us a fair chance, and I really thank you. And I hope you do really well.
I guess now you've been confronted with a few different issues in regards to journalism and disabilities. And I'm just going to put one comment, is I want you to start thinking and reporting and doing your stories. Don't think disability, think differently abled.
My final comment is to be investigative journalists, not some journalists who just copy what is being put out there in the media, or a plagiarism like I do. And you have to ask, what are the unintended consequences of something that's happening? And let me share with you the unintended consequences of Uber. In 1985, there were 5 accessible taxis in Brisbane. In the next 6 to 8 years, the worst case scenario, if Uber keeps going and government is not regulating, there will be no accessible taxis left in Brisbane. Same with Airbnb. We don't have a building code that make private housing accessible. When we look at the lost amount of money in tourism because of inaccessible tourism, it is worth billions of dollars to Australia each year. So start to dig a little deeper than what is put on Donald Trump's local tweets, and be brave and be investigative and be questioning and be a journalist. Thank you.
So in closing, I would also like to remind you of the large responsibility that you future journalists will have. Use your skills and your knowledge wisely. Make sure you include the diversity of viewpoints. The panel has spoken about the ideas of difference and those perspectives. Make sure the voice of disability is in the conversation. So it's been a great pleasure for me to be a facilitator of such an esteemed panel. Congratulations again to you students for being a part of this today, and we look forward to seeing what enhancements will be made in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair, for chairing our panel, and thank you to all, as you say, our esteemed speakers here today. Thank you very much, Kevin Cox, for speaking to something so close to my heart with investigative reporting. Let's get out there, students. That's what we'll be doing this afternoon, which is what I'm doing. Thanking our beautiful panel. Thank you, Kevin, Brett, Katie, Nigel and Alistair. And thank you for the really insightful words you have given us today into reporting of disability. I want the students to come back at 1 o'clock. We've got more panels, and those panels will speak directly to the feature story that you will be writing from this project and that you'll be assessed on. So definitely come back. Sorry. Oh, and Dr. Emma Phillips, thank you very much for participating, sorry. And I just want to thank everyone for coming. It's great to see such a crowded room for such an important event. So we'll see you all at 1 o'clock, hopefully.